Good evening. Welcome. I'm Ann Eichinger, pastor here at Central Presbyterian, and we are so glad to always welcome Martin Donneroy and the King University Institute of Faith and Culture. We always are happy to have you all here and hope you feel very comfortable here. The thing that is of most importance, if you need a restroom, go right down this hallway, make a left. The first door on your left is the men's, the second one is the women's. So we hope that if you need anything, you can see me or Patty Caldwell, Paul Conco, he knows this church pretty well, so if you need anything, we're glad to have you here. Welcome. Read that off. You know how to turn these on?
I do, thanks. Welcome tonight. We're so glad you're here. This is the King Institute for Faith and Culture. My name is Martin Donneroy, and I direct the King Institute. We've been around in Bristol since 2007, founded by Dale Brown as the Frederick Buechner Institute for Faith and Culture. We've brought in a speaker series every year ever since. We have housed speakers at the intersection of faith and culture from all different kinds of professions and all kinds of different walks. But our favorite and the thing that I have had the pleasure of going back to over and over again is children's literature, especially with Katherine Paterson and Kimberly Brubaker Bradley, and tonight we add a third with Stephanie Tolan. My goal is to have virtually the entire stage filled with children's authors eventually, and we'll be up there together. It is we like doing this in Bristol. We hope you'll come join us anytime. Our spring schedule is a little in flux. I have just had the 6th person this year cancel on me. So we'll do something for MLK, but I don't know who it's going to be yet. So I'll find that out. Yeah, somebody, we have had people with health concerns and all kinds of issues this year, so it's been a uniquely strange year for us at the King Institute. But we will have some good stuff coming up in the spring as well. But this is a perfect way to end our fall semester. Our fall term has taken us in various directions, and I'm glad you're here tonight. If you do want to find out anything more about us, you can find us on Facebook, you can find us on YouTube, you can find us on the King University website, and that'll have information about everything. We post videos of almost everything we do. This one will be videoed, and we'll post that eventually, so you have a chance to peruse some of the things we've done in the past. It's also a pleasure to be back at Central. Always, we're grateful to Anne and the entire congregation at Central. We're so glad to be here. I also want to take a moment, because many of you don't know this yet. We have somebody who really is the brains behind the operation, has changed. This is Elizabeth Patrick. And if you haven't met Elizabeth yet, there she is. Elizabeth began her professional career as a lawyer, decided that was not for her, so she became a Presbyterian minister, decided that was not full-time, added 2 boys along the way, Henry and Ben, but really the pinnacle of her achievement is now working at the King Institute for Faith and Culture, and we could not be happier that she's part of this institute now. Please do greet her if you haven't met Elizabeth before. And her husband, Bill, teaches math with me at King. So very happy to have her along. I should also say Happy St. Andrew's Day. Yes. This is November the 30th. I spent 6 years living in Scotland, and so I'm honoring St. Andrew's Day with my tartan tie today. And glad you're there. I appreciate that. That was a bit of a show of support from the front. I rarely get that. Good to have. But thanks most of all for being here tonight. It's a cold night, it's a Monday night, and we're just happy to have you. This is Wednesday night. That's the way. It's the end of a semester. I have survived a semester, and it's just good that I'm standing up, and as far as I know, speaking compass minutes. So I want to tell you briefly about who we've got, and then we're going to do a little conversation here at the front. Katherine Paterson is a King alumna. Graduated in 1954. Among other things, she's been named a living legend by the Library of Congress. We didn't need the Library of Congress to tell us that, but she has been acknowledged as such. She's won many, many awards, including 2 Newbery Awards and 2 National Book Awards. Some of her books have been made into films. You probably know The Bridge to Terabithia, Great Gilly Hopkins, and so forth. She's received the Hans Christian Andersen Award, the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award, and other things as well. She is joined here today by a co-author for a play that we are about to premiere starting on Friday. The play is called Good King Wenceslas. This is a Christmas play. It'll be at the Paramount downtown, and we would love to see you there. Catherine and Stephanie, who co-wrote this, which we may be their 8th play together. We don't know how many. It's several plays that they've written together. And this is the world premiere of Good King Wenceslas, and they'll be there on Friday night. The play is at 7:30 at the Paramount. If you're interested in going, you buy your tickets directly from the Paramount Theater. Stephanie is also a writer for children. She won the Newbery Award for surviving the Applewhites. She's written 27 books for children and young adults, and is the co-author of Guiding the Gifted Child, as well as an essay called Visit Cheetah about the needs of gifted children that's been translated into 40 languages. She has worked on the question of gifted children in many ways for a very long time, and has written about that in addition to her writing for children. Her most recent nonfiction work for adults is Change Your Story, Change Your Life. Kimberly Brubaker Bradley is known to many of us here in Bristol because she lives here in Bristol, and we're delighted to have her back as well. A 2-time Newbery Honoree and a New York Times Bestselling author for The War That Saved My Life, and then its sequel, The War That I Finally Won. Many of you may know the book Fighting Words more recently, and she's about to publish a biography of Rosalind Franklin next Tuesday, and she has one in her hands. There you go. She persisted, Rosalind Franklin. She's been given numerous awards as well, and has been a great person to have in the Bristol community. Very willing to give of her time and involve herself in our local community, and maybe something we'll touch on in the discussion tonight, especially in giving books to children in the Appalachian Literacy Initiative. So we're very pleased to have her here as well. So it's great to have these 3 people all together. Tomorrow, if you want to hear Catherine again, we will be at 9:45 in the King University Chapel. And there, Catherine will read from her new memoir, reissued memoir, Stories from My Life. That'll be at 9:45 in the King Chapel. We have a couple of copies of that for sale as well back here at the back. We do have books at the back, so please do peruse the book table at the end. And then, again, one other thing to announce. I knew there was something else. Tomorrow at 4, all 3 of our authors will be in the Bristol Public Library in the Kegley Room. If you know the Kegley Room upstairs, they'll be in there just for an informal meet and greet. If you have a book you want signed, if you want to spend some time, please come along. We'll be there from 4 to 5 tomorrow afternoon. And then the play is on Friday. That's a lot of announcements. I hope you remember them all, because I'm going to be asking you to tell me about them at the very end. So I'm going to ask our authors to please come up to the front, and we will get started. Please join me in welcoming Stephanie, Katherine, and I realized at dinner one of the great things about moderating this is that I don't have to do much work because they have a lot to say. My opening question, though, is a question that I hope is one that will be illuminating, and also not one of those pitches that you don't see coming. I'm curious if you could tell us a book, doesn't have to be a favorite book, but a book that meant a lot to you as a child reader. Something that for you was enlivening, and that got you interested in reading, and that did for you the kinds of things that you think a children's book should do.
Yeah, okay, I'll start. I don't know if this counts quite the way you think, because I was a little bit older. I was 14, but there was a book that started me on what later clearly led to becoming a children's writer. I didn't realize it at the time, but freshman year in high school, I read Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time. And I had just, my friend Sarah gave it to me in the hallway. I said, you ought to read this. And so I started reading it in class and kept reading it in class, you know, the trick where you put the book on your lap and you're studying really hard. And when I got to the end of it, I thought that was an astonishing book. And then I thought, this was the thing that made this book different than other books. Why? Why did I love that book that much? And for the first time, instead of thinking about it as just a story that I loved, I thought of it as a set of, the writer did something that I loved. And so I immediately took the book and started reading it again. I mean, I shut it and then I opened it again and tried to figure out what had happened that made this book that good to me. I mean, what were the things that made it different? So that's the one that sticks in my memory, because and I still once in a while will do that, and not very often now because I read so many different books, but where I get to the end of the book and immediately flip back to the front. And that was the first time it ever happened.
I was a reader as a child, not a writer. Most of my writing friends were writers as children. I definitely was not. In fact, the few things that have survived shouldn't have. Trying to pick out one book is very hard for me, but I guess the book that I looked at and realized how much it influenced my own writing was not a children's book, but I read it as a child. My mother went on a trip, and there were 5 children, and my parents were missionaries and then Presbyterian pastored, and we didn't have any money. So if there were books, they were everybody's book. But when Mother came back from this trip, and I was the middle child of 5, and gave me a book that she knew I would love. It had won the Pulitzer Prize the previous year, and it had inappropriate language, it had sex, and it changed my life. Not because of that, but it was because it was a story of a boy who had a deer. It was Martin King Rawlings, the yearling. And I love that book. I so love that book. And it almost got lost in a typhoon when I was a missionary in Japan. And so it was, if you look at it, it's swollen through the floods. I was asked some years ago for a magazine for writers of middle grade students to write a book that had meant a lot to me when I was that age. And I thought, well, of course it was The Yearling, but I haven't read it for a long time. And I went back and read The Yearling as an adult, and I thought, this book has influenced my writing more than anything else. And I still have this deep kinship to that book. So it'll always be a book that I truly love.
Well, she's just ruined the whole thing that I was going to say, because she brought out The Yearling, and I hated it. I loved it, but I did not recover from it. It was so devastating that I just thought, now I became terrified of books. But what I meant to say before she mentioned The Yearling was not about that. It was that when I would go and talk to kids about being a writer, I would always say, I think I probably became a writer in my mother's womb, because I had 2 older siblings, and she read to them. She had been a librarian, and she read to them all the time. So I started hearing books before I was a human being on my own. And then she read when I was 8, I think. She read David Copperfield to us, and that did it. That was it. I would have to be a writer in some way. I will never forget Uriah Heep. Those characters were so powerful, and it was just not a thing that she would have read to me when I was 8. Except, and then I found Freddie the Pig Detective, and I found more things that were designed for kids. And then the first, well, I was briefly an actor because my husband was in theater, and I was briefly an actor, and I was not good enough to want to keep on doing it. And so I became unemployed because the children's theater I was working with closed. And so I said, well, while I'm on unemployment, I'll write the book for my kid's self. So I wrote a mystery, but it was based on Enid Blyton's mysteries. And it was way late for me to write an Enid Blyton book. But I did, and I sent it, and I sent it off to Scribner's, and they sent it back and said, well, this is kind of old-fashioned, duh. And they said, but you write really well, so if you do another one, we'd like to see it. And so I decided that I should write another one. And so, and my grandfather had died, there is Alzheimer's in my family, but it was not known as Alzheimer's. And so my great-grandmother died in a mental institution, and this became a thing in the family. And so I wrote a book called Grandpa and Me, which is about a girl whose grandfather gets Alzheimer's. It was before we called it Alzheimer's, but he was losing his memory. And so they said, yes, this is really good. And my husband, who's a theater person, called an agent friend in New York and said, is there anybody in your agency who represents children's writers? And they said, yes, Marilyn Marlowe is probably the best agent for children's literature there is, and so she should send it to her. And I sent it to her, and she said, I want you as a client. And my husband and I went out for Chinese that night to celebrate, and my fortune cookie said, you're a fool if you doubt her. And I said, okay, that's it. So that's that's how that happened.
This is entirely aside, but who's your agent now? Marilyn Marlowe is passed.
Yeah, Marilyn has passed. Well, so has my second agent. So right now it's Ginger Knowlton because she's
also my agent.
Because
the reason
she's the offspring of that agency.
Right. Her father was not only the agent for Jean Craighead George, he was also the first model for the Marlboro Man. I kid you not, and he raced falcons. But meanwhile, the reason I laugh is because I started out writing series fiction. That I'm not going to say the name of I don't think anybody cares anymore, but I still am not supposed to say the name of the series. But if you imagine the Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew or something that lots of people wrote. So I was writing for this series, and the person whose name was on the cover, I had written another novel too that was published, and she said, well, at this point you need an agent. And she said, how about mine, Marilyn Marlowe? And I said, Marilyn Marlowe scares me to death.
But the good thing is she scares editors too.
She scared everyone.
She scared editors.
She scared
People
everyone.
didn't go against
Almost
Marilyn.
nobody intimidates me, but Marilyn Marlowe did. And so Bonnie said, okay, I understand that. You want to talk to Ginger. So that's how I got. Ginger's been my agent for 24 years. So, that just made me laugh when you said that. I know they all were looking at me, wondering why I was laughing when you said that.
Was the series Charles Dickens as well?
Yes.
That's what I thought. You're one of those.
Well known for my Dickens interpretations.
I think that's great insight. I'm then curious when not necessarily writing, but when did you start to construct stories? When do you start to make up a story that you think this has legs and I want to really flesh this out and I want to tell this story? When did that begin?
But those are two different questions.
Answer
Because,
both.
I mean, when do you first want to tell a story is very different from when do you think you want to construct a novel, which is,
Okay.
I mean, that's a much different.
We'll start with the prior.
Okay, but somebody other than me should.
You could count it as lying, and that was me early on. I mean, you know, I made up stories all the time.
Yeah.
I would never think of writing them down when I was a kid, but I made up stories all the time. I went to school, I walked to school, of course, because we all walked to school, and I would go from bush to bush, hiding from the enemies that were at various places. And it was always, I was living in my imagination all the time. But I didn't know that I would be a writer. It just wasn't occurring to me. I knew I loved books. Because I was always telling stories.
I mean, it was pretty much the same thing with me. I would be walking down the street to school, because
Me too.
I also walked to school. And if a dog ran down the street, I would start in my mind composing a story about a dog running down the street. And I really did think that everybody in the world did this all the time. So it was a long time before I realized most people didn't completely make up stories all the time.
Well, I would do my stories out loud as I was walking down the street, always alone from school. And then somebody from school was walking behind me and I didn't realize it. They said, "Who are you talking to?" And then I had to pretend there was somebody that I was talking to, hiding behind a bush or something.
It was probably
I didn't realize a disease that we all had.
So, I mean, I'd like a show of hands. How many of you, when you were 6 or 7, made up stories as you walked down the street?
No,
Okay, so it's not zero.
That's why you have books, right?
But then, like, when did you sit down and try to, like, put it on paper? That's a much different thing.
yeah.
When's that?
Okay, so I'm just going to say this because my college professor not only sadly passed away this spring, but was also a Jeopardy answer 2 nights ago. And 3 people out of 3 wrote who was this person's heroine, Anne of Green Gables, as opposed to the actual answer, Sarah Plain and Tall. Patty McLaughlin was a Jeopardy answer from Final Jeopardy 2 nights ago. And she was also my professor when I was in college. And I was a chemistry major and not intending to be a writer, but she was teaching a children's literature education class for my school, and I thought that sounded fun and easy. And then I wrote my first manuscript because I felt like in a picture book manuscript, it was horrible. And my roommate marched me over and made me stick it in her mailbox because my roommate said, and I quote, and this is true, nothing ever gets published that stays in an author's closet. And Patty handed it back to me, and it was terrible, and I think I knew that, I mean, you know, but I still have it. She handed it back to me with one word written on it, and the word was lovely at the top. So, you can get through about 9 years of rejections on the
Well,
script.
that's different from my first publish.
Well, it wasn't published, I didn't get published
Well,
for another 9
when I was
years.
published when I was in the 2nd grade in the Shanghai American School newspaper, and I can recite my first published poem. Pat, 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 there is the rat, where is the cat? Pat, pat, pat. And right beside it was a letter from Miss Essie Shields, my 2nd grade teacher, that said, the 2nd grader's work is not up to our usual standards. So my first published work was published alongside the first critical review.
If we're going back that far, my first published work was in the Columbia City Daily Star, Columbia City, Indiana. And it was a poem I composed in a children's writing class taken at the Y. The reason I was taking the class is because my mother was teaching a class at the same time and so needed something to do with me. And it started out, the clothespin doll stands so straight, there is not a curl upon her pate. And 8-year-old me had to explain to the teacher what the word pate meant and insist that I was correct. So, no, that's been the one and only attempt at poetry. It's not marvelous, it's awful.
Someone has mentioned the word Jeopardy, and so I'm going to tell you something that I learned 2 weeks ago. And I have no idea, I know nothing about it. But 2 weeks ago, I learned that a person that I've known for a long time was watching Jeopardy and left the room. I guess it was somebody I went to high school with. Anyway, left the room for a moment, and her sister was watching it, and she yelled, "Come in here, come in here." The answer was, the question was, "Your friend Stephanie." I was an answer to Jeopardy, to a question. I have no idea what the question was. She doesn't know. She doesn't know when it was. But I was like stunned.
We could look that up. It's one of my life goals, is to be a Jeopardy question.
Well,
My friend
I've
was
already met mine.
I didn't know it, but all my friends who watched Jeopardy told me that Jacob I love, one of my books was on. Does that
Well,
count?
that doesn't surprise me, but
It counts.
Yeah, of course it counts.
On there, I count that.
Your name.
Either one.
of course it counts.
I'm Tabby.
We don't all
Yeah.
one-upmanship up here.
She's got all the words and the Jeopardy.
Would you like to get a better question for us?
Like I said, I don't have to do a lot. This is good. So if you construct and you start writing early on, I'm curious, I think for a lot of us who have not endeavored to write for children, I think what is staggeringly difficult to imagine is how you find the voice. And especially because I suspect for all three of you, you've written for various readerships. And I have tracked with my own children and trying to interact with them, and I don't have any idea how to talk to them when they were 11 or 12. That's gone from me. So I'm curious how you find that voice along the way, and I'm sure it's a collaborative effort. I'm sure editors are involved and people like that, but how do you do that?
I want to answer that. Because, see, now I was so busy saying that I needed to answer it that I forgot what I was going to say. It's one word for me, and that's magic. I don't know how it happens. I really don't. I mean, an idea will come to me, and I'll start writing it, and it's been, but I'm absolutely terrible at picture books. And for a long time, it took me about a year to write a book. That does not count the one that's been 20 years in the process, but it took 15 years to write this picture book. And then there was this illustrator that illustrated it against the words in some places, and it made me crazy. And so I've never written a picture book, but everything else just comes by magic. The characters come, and it depends on what their ages are, how the book and the idea develops.
Well, I don't consider it magic, but we have this, we've been friends for many years, and she's my magic person, and I'm the very down-to-earth
I'm the weird one.
person. But anyhow, those children live inside me. If they said, well, how do you know children say to me, how do you know how we feel if you this white-haired old lady come creeping in? And I said, I felt that way when I was 9. I know how awful being 13 was for me. And maybe that's why my books are so sad and so fraught, because I had a fraught childhood and adolescence. I'm so much happier now than I ever was when I was young. But I haven't forgotten it. It still lives. That child's soul was and that adolescents are still very much alive inside of me. How about you?
I'm sitting here trying to think of an answer for this, because sometimes I have to work hard at voice and sometimes I don't. So maybe I'm in the middle here. Probably the book of mine that's best known for voice is Fighting Words. And I wrote the first draft of that in a angry temper tantrum and didn't think about it at all. And
That's good.
and well, the first 2 paragraphs and the last 2 paragraphs of the finished novel sitting over here are unchanged from the original 39-page rant, which has never happened either, because usually you have to fuss a lot with beginnings and endings. And so I don't have any idea where that came from, and I don't care. I hope it comes again.
Well, I think there's something rather wonderful about when you're unediting yourself in that initial.
Yeah, it's hard to do.
And I discovered that I do it best when my editor hasn't been allowed to wake up yet. Because if you're, I graduated in English literature at King. I got the highest honor they gave. I was really good reading and writing about what other people said. So that when I started writing, of course, I had this editor over my shoulder. Who in the world do you think you are? And I think most of us have that person. And people say to me, well, I'm going to write a book when I have time. And I don't say it, but what I think very hard is, you will write a book when you have the nerve. Because it's the scariest thing in the world. To put your guts out on the page for other people to laugh at, make fun of. But if you don't, if you're not willing to go that deep inside yourself, your reader's not going to come that deep to you. And it's always co-authorship between you and the reader. Because you can't do it without the reader. It's the reader's imagination, the reader's life experience, the reader's ability to decode the words that make it possible for the book to come alive. But if you're not willing to give the best and the worst of yourself, it's not going to work. Not on the level that you want it to work. And unfortunately, I'm always willing to work on a very deep level. I'm sorry. One of these days I will write entertainment. I thought the Great Gilly Hopkins was going to be an entertainment.
This answer explains to me something that Katherine had shared with me years ago. I was writing a book where what was happening in it was so painful for me that I just sort of couldn't write it anymore, and I was just in crisis, and it was a really hard thing happening to my character, and it was causing me so much pain I didn't know what to do. And I called her and I said, I don't know what to do, and she said, stop writing. I said, what? She said, stop writing. Don't go back until you wake up some morning and you say, I have to go back and do that. And so I stopped writing that book. And she also said, and when it gets the really hard part, wake up really early and write the hardest part right after you wake up. Because that keeps you from having that person who's saying, I can't do this, or this is too much, or something, because I was not fully, absolutely awake. And I was able to do that. And eventually the book got published, but it's one of my most intense ones.
Well, I can remember that particular book because she was going to have to kill a rabbit in the book.
Don't you remember the teeth of the
Yes, I
rabbit?
remember this.
Oh, this is so painful.
And I always say you can kill off as many human beings as you want to in a book, but don't touch the animal. And I killed millions of children. Always killed. In fact, I wrote Come to Jimmy Joe, and one of my friends said, I can't believe it. And I said, what? She said, Grandma didn't die. I said, well, she only had a minor heart irregularity, I think she's gonna live through. She said, you always kill them off. but I've never, have I killed an animal?
No.
No.
Well, it's because of the yearling. That's it. That's why I couldn't kill the darn rabbit. But it was a book about a cult. And this was not long after Jonestown, and I had to learn all about those kind of terrible things. And the guy to show the kid his power kills his rabbit. It was incredibly hard to write. But I didn't think of that yearling connection until just now. But that's it.
That's probably why I
Yes, it was.
killed an animal.
But you're talking about the reader doesn't want you to kill the animal.
No, I'm talking about the reader. The reader just will not stand.
I got a letter from somebody that said, I saw you wrote a sequel to The Way That Saved My Life, and I'm not going to open it unless you promise me that the cat and the pony don't die. I said, don't worry.
Just I better keep them alive.
Yeah, one of the other main characters dies in chapter 1, but whatever, the cat's fine.
Maybe that needs to be on the covers from now on.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
No animals died.
That's right.
That'll be the word that she finally gives.
What do they call them? Trigger warnings?
That's good. Given you need the nerve to do this task that is putting yourself out there, what gives you the nerve? At what point, I remember my writing for my PhD is a very different kind of writing, very dry. 3 people at most have ever read it, as far as I'm aware, and I'm still concerned about those 3. But the sense of not, I remember one of my professors saying the only thing better than being in print is not being in print. Because you're so afraid of putting this stuff out. And the stakes were nothing on mine, whereas it seems to me the stakes are pretty high when you're writing about the kinds of things that each of you has written about. Where do you find the nerve? How do you figure out a way to make yourself vulnerable in this way? What drives that?
Go ahead. I'll follow you.
Okay, I'm wanting to know why she's laughing, because I'm over here with a very serious answer. But I'm writing for the child that I was and the child that is out there that needs the books that you're writing. And that's, we keep talking about these very deep books, and there was a thing all over the internet that I've been seeing the last couple of days, because somebody wrote, I think the New York Times or something, complaining about her kid read too many Captain Underpants, and all the Captain Underpants are the same, there's nothing new and fresh there, and there's not. It's James Bond for 4th grader boys with lots of underwear jokes, but I thought it was a really stupidly condescending article, even if she did name many good books that she liked at the end, none of which were mine either, but or either of yours, I believe, although some of their friends that I got named. But meanwhile, there's the guy that wrote Captain Underpants used to get kicked out of class every single day because he had ADD and Dave Pilkey and was a little difficult. And so he would sit in the hallway and draw cartoons of the teacher getting hit by the underwear, the slingshot out of the underwear. And his teacher got mad at him one day and threw some of them away and said, nobody is ever going to pay you to write cartoons about someone in their underwear.
So there.
Yeah, and he has more
Revenge.
Yeah, and so there was a kid that needed Captain Underpants, and there was a kid that needed Jacob I Have Loved, and there was a kid that needed Surviving the Applewhites, and
That's why we shouldn't ban
any of them. And then, the kids should be reading what they need to read at the time, and they know what it is. If you give them a big enough choice, they're going to pick Captain Underpants, or they're going to pick Fighting Words, or they're going to pick Katie the Cat Sitter is a new graphic novel that, because by my nonprofit, I just had to order more because we were out despite. Katie the Cat Sitter is a completely bonkers graphic novel about a girl named Katie trying to raise a little extra money, so decides to cat sit for her friend the neighbor down the apartment complex or something, the neighbor turns out to have 300 cats and superpowers. And all the cats also have superpowers, and it gets a little crazy from there.
Well, I was going to ask you the original question, but we've gotten more interesting as we're going. But because I was writing a book called Rebels of the Heavenly Kingdom, which takes place in 19th century China. And it's about war and the terribleness of war. And I knew nobody was going to want to read this book. I didn't want to write this book. It was so awful. And so our son we had a daughter in college. Our son had just been accepted to go to Dartmouth. Money, money, money. And we had 2 more children that were going to have to go to college. And it was very important that I write this book because we needed no money. And I couldn't. So I had to get up the nerve to tell my husband that even though we'd used money for me to go to China to do research, money we really didn't have, that I was never going to be able to finish the book. And he was reading a newspaper in the living room when I decided that the announcement would have to be made. We're just going to have to do something. I would have to get a real job or something, you know. So I went into the room with feeling really, really awful. And I said, "I'm sorry, John, but I am never, never, never going to be able to finish this book." And he hardly looks up from the paper, but he says behind the paper, "Oh, you've reached that point, have you?" Apparently, I had done this on every single book that I'd ever written. I had totally forgotten that I always got to the point where the book was ever going to be finished. And I was so mad that I thought, okay, 3 pages a day. You can't get up from the desk until you write 3 pages. The margins can be as wide as you want to make them. The page can be as short, but that's got to be 3 pages before you can do anything else in the world. And I finally finished the book.
And I gotta tell you, it is my favorite book of hers. I love it so much.
Not the best, I mean, it's not the bestseller by any means.
No, I know that. But then I love it, that's why. I love it, Mike. I'm telling you, there's magic at work in the whole
There
business.
may be 1 or 2 other people who like that book, but they're not a huge crowd.
I just think that members of my family in the audience enjoyed that story a little more than they should have. You're not watching the faces, I am.
I'm not the only person who does that.
Apparently not. I don't know who else though.
Well, the book I'm working on now has been underway more or less, mostly less, for 20 years, so.
But you are going to finish it, because I'm old, and you've got to finish it before I die, so I can find out what happens.
I do know I have to finish it before I die. It's not gonna work after that.
Oh, mercy.
We introduced another theme there that I did have on my little notes. That's great. We live in an age in which the banning of books is suddenly again a thing. I'm curious how you react to that. What resources can you give us in those kinds of debates and conversations to try to say, no, this is a terrible idea?
Well, I went and spoke to the Tennessee legislature.
Good for you.
It didn't do any good. Well, I mean, it might, who knows? It didn't do any immediate apparent good, but along with other children's authors from Tennessee, including Andrew Marinus and Rudis Pettis, and some other people from the Tennessee Association of School Libraries. It's a movement that's highly organized, oddly enough, highly funded, and has its roots in white supremacy and homophobia, and it is a tough thing to fight, and it is important that we fight. And so, I mean, it's not nobody is taking away the right to tell, that any parent has to say that that book is not, appropriate for my child. And I know that one of my own books that came out when my son was 10, and he said, it's a war book, and he said, should I read it? And I said, honestly, not yet. And he said, okay, because I know my son, and I knew that he would have nightmares, and he did, about things like in that book. It was not the right book for him, but I don't have the right to tell his entire class, you can't read the book. And so, and all of this, there's a lot of really silly, crazy rhetoric going on. And the librarians in the schools and in the country are doing a terrific job. We're in a really great time for children's literature. There's some beautiful, beautiful books being written, and we're finally really beginning to be open to the diversity that reflects our nation as it is, which is something that has been long overdue. And so, don't keep your mouth shut. Speak out when you can. Vote, run for school board if you can stomach that. You've got to just, and it really does hurt children's authors. It's not going to hurt the three of us likely. When you start getting the shiny stickers, people still publish your books. But first-time writers whose books get quietly swept aside, from being bought by libraries because they're on a slightly controversial topic that somebody is going to get mad about, they're going to have their careers affected in a bad way. And the thing is entirely stupid. There were, you opened up a whole rant for me here, Martin, but in Tennessee, the branch of Moms for Liberty, what they've actually tried to ban in Tennessee, does include Mouse, which is a stunning Holocaust graphic novel. That was on the grounds that it showed nudity. The nudity in question were cartoon mice who starved to death in a concentration camp and whose bodies were piled up in one scene. So we're talking about cartoon drawings of starved mice, and that's nudity, okay? But also, they also tried to, I'm not kidding, this is true, this is real, it was in the county that Nashville's in, which I'm now blanking on. Davidson. They tried to ban the kindergarten nonfiction book, Seahorse, the Shyest Fish in the Sea, which is a book with photographic illustrations, 16 pages, about seahorses, because, this was the grounds, seahorses, the male contains the eggs, or holds the eggs in a pouch once they're fertilized, and then releases the little baby seahorses, and that was opening the door wide to kindergartners believing that they could be transgender. What? No, I'm not kidding. That is an actual book, and that was the actual reason in the state of Tennessee.
Well, I've been banned a lot of times for various reasons, but people say to me, well, aren't you proud? And I said, no, because it means that some teacher or some librarian is in trouble because of me. I can't be happy about that, and I'm certainly not proud about it. And I'm not going to go about raving about how wonderful it is to be banned. I think it's tragic. The whole thing is tragic. And my heart goes out to, I've talked to these people. Sometimes if I know it's happening and they call me, then I say, I give them the resources from Teachers of English and from the ALA and various organizations which will come and stand with them. I've had some absolutely amazing things. One school district in Connecticut wanted to ban Gilly Hopkins. No, this was in Kansas. And so a member of the school board said, okay, we'll vote on this next meeting, but nobody can vote unless they've read the book, the whole book. And when they came to the vote, they voted unanimously to keep it. Because what had they, somebody picked out this little bit and picked out that little bit.
Context matters.
And, the context is important in a book, not just a little bitty thing that would offend. I mean, if a book has power, it has the power to offend folks.
Well, and sometimes the quote that they take is meant to be offensive and is offensive in the context of the book.
Exactly, like
Showing
Gilly
kids-
Hopkins is terribly racially prejudiced. I'm sorry, but she's terribly racially prejudiced.
Right.
That's how she takes out her anger in the world. Somebody's got to be somebody she can be unhappy about.
But that doesn't mean that the book is pro-racism.
No.
Right, and that's the point, is, I mean.
And it's the quite opposite.
Right, so if you just take this phrase and you don't have it in the whole context,
Yeah.
then it has the opposite meaning that it has within the context. Yeah.
Well, this was a long time ago, but in the Applewhites, it was banned in a school district because Jake smoked. And Jake smoked until he ran out of cigarettes, and he realized he hated it always anyway, and he couldn't figure out how to walk in North Carolina and past the tobacco fields and turn it into a cigarette, so he had to quit smoking cigarettes. And he was just rebelling. But it was just bizarre, and when they come up with these bizarre reasons, and that there are kids out there that need whatever it is for whatever their reasons, and if they're not going to read it, they're not going to read it. Or, as my son said when they made him read a book where animals died, he said, "I didn't read it." And I said, "But you got like 95% on your test." And he said, "Well, Mom, they talked about it." So I knew I was going to be on the test, but I couldn't read that book. And he had a right to not read a book
Absolutely.
that upset him. And so he didn't.
Yeah,
But nobody could have forced him to read that book.
But that is another thing about books. Unlike visual images, if a book gets to be too much for the kid, they can shut it and walk away. And I know that there were times my children, because they had pretty wide-ranging reading, would get partway through a book and go, "Nope. No, not yet," or "not ever," and walk away from it. And I think most of us probably do that too. Last week I got 30 pages into a book that looked pretty good from the library. I can't remember what it's called now, and I realized that there is essentially no plot whatsoever here. I already know what's going to happen, so it seems silly to waste the next couple of hours. And I put it on. That's not because it was overwhelming me, but Anne Rice did, and I put her down. And
there's all sorts of authors I've put down.
But I mean, Anne Rice
It's
was
okay.
scary, but a kid's gonna do that too. They're not gonna read
If I
it.
knew that one of my children, I had 4, if I knew that one of them was reading a book that I knew would be a very tough book. I remember The Chocolate War, which is a very, very rough book for adolescents. And my son was reading it, and I had read it, and I always tried to read books that my kids were reading. And I knew he was about to finish it, and I lurked outside his bedroom door. I really did, because I wanted to be there when he came out, having read the ending of that book. And he came storming out, and I said, "What'd you think?" He said, "That was one of those books you just have to throw it at the wall." And well, it's a powerful book. It's a powerful book. And of course, a writer wants a book to have power. But you have power for good, you have power for
Marilyn was his
all
agent.
kinds of power.
Marilyn was his agent. But I didn't, I got quite grumpy at him, because more than that, it was the next one after Chocolate War that got to me.
I know what you mean.
Yeah,
On
and
on the school bus, you mean?
yes,
Oh.
and I just said, I said to Marilyn, I said, I don't like that book, and I don't like it being out there. But I wouldn't have said you can't have, it shouldn't be out there. But I was very grumpy about that book, because there was no hope in it. There was not the shred of hope about humanity in that book, and I can't write a book that doesn't have some sort of thing that says, you know, we're here
We're
for
talking
a
about
reason.
Robert Cormier. I don't know. A lot of these Cormier. Yeah. A lot of the group here, you guys that are college age, are probably wondering who, but
Yeah, right.
which is fair. But we're also when we talk about these books, we're talking about books that are for teens. I mean, he was one of the original YA writers.
Yeah.
And so they're a little different than, you know, writing for the 10-year-olds or the two.
Well, I get worried about children who can read very well. It doesn't necessarily mean they're emotionally ready for a book.
Right.
And I think in those cases, that it really is a parent's prerogative to say,
Absolutely.
you're not quite ready for
Well,
that.
I was signing books once at St. Anne's across the street, and it was right when the book that I told you that I told my son not to read yet, which was called For Freedom, which is actually it's still in print, oddly enough. But it was a true story of a woman who lived in Kingsport, of her life during World War II. It's written as fiction, but Suzanne W. Hall was still alive, and I interviewed it and wrote it after, you know, I mean, it was her life story as a spy in World War II for the French resistance. And so I'm signing these books at St. Anne's, and one of the moms comes up and says she's going to buy it for her second grader. And I said, I wouldn't, I'm like, you know, I've got these picture books, and she's like, no, my child is a very good reader. And I said, I'm sure they're a very good reader. I wouldn't, this is a true story of stuff that happened in war. It's not written graphically, but it would be pretty upsetting to a 7-year-old. And the mom started getting fairly hostile about the second grader thing.
Appreciating how wonderful her child was.
Oh, yeah, I was not appreciating how wonderful the child was. And the woman that was helping sell books just grabs a book, opened it to a page, and said, read paragraph 1. And the mom went, oh, what do you suggest for a second grader? One of those down there, yeah. So, I mean, yeah.
I want to give a couple of minutes for audience questions. If you have a question, I will bring the mic to you. So I'm opening it up. It also means I have to stand up, I realize.
I'm a recreational writer and I haven't published anything yet. But I've been reading a lot of books about writing. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. A little closer. It's the light screen.
It sounded like I was getting feedback. Is it okay?
Yeah.
Okay. And a lot of them seem to say, well, if you just write enough, you'll be good enough that you'll be able to produce something that's worth publishing. And I'm like, well, is it possible that some of us will just never be that good? No matter how much we write. And maybe this is where the nerve comes in that you all were talking about. I don't know. I do believe in writing a lot. And like I've done National Novel Writing Month any number of years. Just for I call it a month-long writing exercise, which is what it is. You don't really end up with a novel. You end up with 50,000 words of whatever comes off the top of your head. But it's good exercise, and I just wondered about that.
So,
Is it possible that a person maybe just really isn't good enough? Which doesn't mean they shouldn't write, but it means they're slated for disappointment, I guess.
I think everyone should write, but not everyone should publish. Does that make sense? Because I think writing, and certainly for me, is a wonderful way to figure out how I think. Because it slows down the whole process, and you have to work out problems for yourself that way. I think most of us maybe write children's books not to give answers, but to ask questions that you're struggling with. So I think it's a wonderful way to do it. And people will say, I want you to read my book and tell me if it's good enough. Well, I can't really, They want to know if they should keep at it or whatever. I think only
Yeah, well, and I think that there's kind of two ways to answer your question. Is it possible to write an awful lot of words for a very long time and never have anything published? Yes, absolutely. Is it possible to work on craft for a long time before you get to publication and still get there? Yes, absolutely. I don't think that very many writers, and the ones that I've heard about I don't like very well, that just sit down and write something the very first time. Obviously not you, Stephanie, I like you very much, but you hear about, what's her name that wrote when she was The Outsiders when she was 16, Susie Hinton.
Well,
yeah, I mean, you can be a little annoyed about talent like that, frankly, but at the same time, it is a craft, and most people can reach, a level, and I do think too is, are you looking for publication, or are you looking to tell a story that only you can tell? And those are two questions that are very different also, because if what you're really truly seeking is publication, first of all, you can pay to publish your own book, a lot of people do, but the other thing is, you can publish things on like cookbooks or something, you know what I mean? There are things that have very few actual words in them that are nonetheless published, or nonfiction about screwdrivers, I don't know, I'm just making things up. Or you can say, this story is the story that I really want to work to tell until I'm a good enough writer to tell it. And there's the first draft that I sent my editor of The War That Saved My Life was about the first 80 pages. And I had already written the first chapter several times over, but I sent my editor the first 80 pages, and she said, "This isn't really your next book, is it?" Yeah, that was not what I wanted her to say. And I said, wow, yeah, okay, so this isn't working, and I threw that one away, but it was the story I wanted to learn to write well enough to tell. And so, 6 full drafts and several more first chapters later, I had a book. And now I could have written, in that same amount of time, 6 totally different bad drafts. So sometimes this story is so important, I have to figure out a new way to tell it and a new way to say it over and over to improve it. And not just say, okay, I wrote that story, I'm done, now I'm going to write this story. I think that going back and trying to figure out what you really want to say and how to say it is more likely to lead to a book that you can share with the world.
Well, I want to add that there's a wonderful book called The Artist's Way, and you already know it. When I wrote Welcome to the Ark, it went through some times with my editor just saying it's not working, and she sent it back after the second go round, and I just said, I don't know what to do, and Catherine said, don't do anything, stop writing for a while, just stop writing for a while. And I thought, okay, well, and my husband happened to be homesick, and she had sent the book, The Artist's Way, to him because he was bound to his chair with oxygen for a while, and a long while, and he was, there was nothing, and he did not want to have anything to do with The Artist's Way. And I thought, okay, I'll just look at this. And I went through it. It's based on the 12-step program, and it has amazing quotations in it, and it's very powerful. And so I just decided, okay, and Catherine said, don't even go into your office. Don't even go in there. So I took The Artist's Way out to our back porch and sat at my high school desk, which we had brought back when my school had quit, and I sat there and every day I did the artist's way, and by the end of and I was very good, I did all the things you're supposed to do and not read. You write 3 pages every single day and you're not allowed to read them again. And it just did something, and I went back to the book and I was able to write it. And so, you know, you just don't, you can go through bad times when nothing's happening, or you can go through times when everything you touch turns to gold somehow. And that's why I go back to magic.
Anybody else?
Hi, I love all the recommendations, the reading recommendations you've been giving tonight. So I'm just wondering, is there any newer author who you're really excited about what they're doing right now and what they're putting out into the world?
The one I'm most excited about is Christina Sutorn-Bott, so when Fighting Words got the Newbery Honor, she got 2 Newbery Honors the same year. One was for All 13, which is a nonfiction account of the rescue of the boys from the cave in Thailand. And Christina herself is part Thai and was actually in Thailand when that happened. The other honor winner in the same year was A Wish in the Dark, which is an Asian fantasy version of Les Miserables for 10-year-olds. Yes, and she just wrote a graphic novel called The Tryout about her failed attempts to make the cheerleading team as a 13-year-old. And like everything the woman, she's written picture books that are amazing. She just came out like boom from nowhere, and I think she's just the bomb. So I have yet to meet her in person, but I'm hoping we get to sometime soon.
I am so far behind on these new writers that I really can't contribute to the, you know, I think, oh, new writer, oh, Kate DeCamillo. No, Kate has been at it for quite a while.
She's known now, yeah.
But I knew her when she was new. It's you know, one of the problems of being as old as I am. I've gone through several generations of writers.
Nick Stone, she would be another one. Nick Stone's amazing. She writes mostly YA, but some middle grades.
I also belong to a book club that doesn't allow you to read children's books for the book club selection. It was because it was started by a woman who was the young adult, children's and young adult consultant for the state, and she said, I have to read children's books all the time. I've got to be in a club that doesn't have children's books. Every now and then I'm persuaded to read something.
I'm more in the line of Catherine. I belong to a writers group, and they're writing. Some of them are writing kids books for today, and Lisa Klein Ransom is one of them, and she's quite wonderful. She writes wonderful books. Hers are mostly historical, and we just had a writers meeting on Monday, and it's two of the people at the writers group are writing novels in verse, and another one in the writers group has already written a novel in verse, and it has never absolutely occurred to me in my whole life, even though I wrote poetry for a long time, to write a novel in verse. And these are amazing and powerful, and I could no more do that than I could stand on my head up here and you know, balance for 3 hours. And it just is not a thing but it's fascinating to me because these are quite powerful books and utterly different from what I'm used to.
I mean, Kwame Alexander's not a known name, but The Door of No Return that he just wrote is a novel in verse.
Yeah, there's suddenly, I mean, it's suddenly a big thing. And another one, younger writer, I read it and I was embarrassed to read it. And I said, okay, so I must be really old because it seemed it was way over the top for me. It was just, I can understand why if the book banners got hold of her book, they would be freaking out.
What was it?
Right now, I just, you know, I really blank on this book because I read it and I had to respond to her because it was out. It was an actual book. And so I just wrote her a kind of generic thing about the stuff in it that I liked, but it was too raw and too intense for me. And so I just have not been keeping up with. And of course, then now this is publish your own book, and that's what some of the writers in my writers group are doing, and putting it out. And then they have nobody to be in any way a watchdog, and I think my good editors have been very important to me along the way. And so I just don't know how to really answer that.
Well, I'll give you another name. Do you remember Rhonda Donnie? Her recent book is called How to Find What You're Not Looking For. That was very, very good. And Elizabeth Acevedo, I think, is also very well known at this point, but Clap When You Land is my favorite of hers by a long, long way. And I just read another graphic novel that I thought was absolutely fantastic. It's the same. I read Katie the tryout and this other one at the same time, and now I'm not going to find any of that. But I would look at some of the graphic novel. Lucy Knisley, Knisley. I don't know how she says it. She's very good. She's a new graphic novelist.
I want to leave us some time for book signing. I want to ask you one short final question to kind of finish this up. A theme that Stephanie mentioned earlier that I think is a theme that all your work holds out dearly is hope. I wonder if you can give us a word or two about where you're finding hope right now.
Well, I would like to, excuse me. I would like to go to one of my true heroes. And one of the high points of my life was handing Congressman John Lewis the National Book Award when I was chair of the jury that year. And we brought him to Vermont because March 1 became Vermont Reads, so we were reading it all over the state. And he said, can I say what he said? All of my stories get too long, but anyhow, he said, I had 3 conditions for coming. One is that he's allowed to talk to a lot of young people, and they fill the largest auditorium in Vermont twice with high school, middle school and high school students, and they had waiting lists that never stopped for more schools wanting to come in to hear him speak. And the second criterion was that Senator Patrick Leahy had to introduce him because he loved Senator Leahy, as do I. And the third thing is he had to be able to go to Ben and Jerry's, and we were able to do all 3. But one of the questions he got was, do you have any hope? Are you hopeful or pessimistic about the future of the world? And he said, how can I be pessimistic? I see what young people are doing. They're the leaders in the environmental movement. They're the leaders in a safe gun law movement. They're the leaders in the Black Lives Matter movement. Of course I'm optimistic when I see what young people are doing. And I thought, how wonderful. Here's this elderly congressman looking at the young people of our country for hope. And so I decided that was a good way to look. Just look at young people and think, well, I'm old and I won't live through a lot of this, but they're facing it with courage. And not just, their hope has legs.
Yeah.
It's not just wishful thinking. I think it's wonderful.
I can't tap that, so I'm not even going to try.
Well, it's really tricky because I'm grateful for being as old as I am because I don't have to see how some of this stuff is going to work out. And then I look at what we're taking for granted now as ordinary in Okay, there were 2 women here talking about being pastors. I have friends who were the first Episcopal female priests. And you look at now, if you want to publish, it's a good idea to be a person of color because we've been too white for too long without realizing it. And the changes are happening that are incredibly powerful. But all we hear from the news are the worst possible stories, and I have simply had to say, okay, I just don't do the news anymore because I know that there is hope in humanity because we've changed so much since I was born in 1942. And the world is very different in a lot of positive ways, not just all the negative ways. And so if we could ever hope for human beings, you know, and yeah, I was horrified to realize that almost all of my history lesson that I got in grade school were lies. That was horrific to me. But now we know that. You know, I'm sorry, Thanksgiving was not a happy time between white people from England and all the Native Americans. You know, it wasn't just, oh, look, turkey, and fun stuff, and we'll all get along well. I started reading the history of our country, and I had to stop because the truth was not something I was happy with. And now they want to take sex out of the schools. Why don't they take, you know, the crazed version of our country when we don't see how much has changed. We don't see how much better things are because we just focus on the negatives in all the stuff that's trying to get you to do something by scaring you. And I just think that's I want to give kids hope, because without hope there's just no point in any of us going on. And plus it was in the AARP, and because I'm old I get to read AARP all the time, and they had a whole thing, and I took it to my writers group because they're writing for kids, and this whole article about what's happening to our teenagers. They are committing suicide in numbers that we've never seen before. And, you know, and I'm thinking, okay, so on the one hand, they're getting involved in the world, and on the other hand, they're losing hope. And so the most we can do is try to share with them the humanity that is positive. And if you go into the world with a positive attitude and you smile at people all the time, and they smile back. I'm stunned at how nice human beings are, because you don't hear about that. And COVID has been terribly difficult, especially for teenagers, because that's the time they get together and interact with each other, and they haven't been able to do it. And, you know, we've got to offer them hope instead of constant focus on the threats. And we just spend so much time saying we're destroying the world and not noticing how many positive changes we have already made. I mean, nobody thought about the environment. The rivers have caught fire, and when they caught fire, we did something about it finally. So I just think, you know, we're going to do what we can do, but we've got to tell the kids it's possible. We've got to offer them some ray of hope instead of, you know, all this, and taking away their ability to read what they feel like reading is not the way to go.
Well, that's a good way to finish, I think. I want to stress that no rabbits were harmed in any way in the entire time we were up here, and I do think all three panelists did demonstrate for us a little bit of the magic that they bring to the page as well. Please join me in thanking table at the back, and if you want to come and have a word, get a book signed, please do linger. Thank you so much for being here tonight.